And the fourth speaker is John Lent, who is taught journalism and mass comm from 1960 to 2011. He was a communication, a PhD communication researcher in the Philippines in the 1960s. And he wrote the first modern history of Philippine journalism. Can you imagine that? It took an American to write a modern history of Philippine mass communication. He has taught in Malaysia, Canada. Rogers is a distinguished professor. In China, he was visiting professor in 4 universities. And now he is a retired professor from Temple University. But Professor Lent's expertise now is unique. From mass communication, he went into the field of comic art, because that's a neglected field of research in the communication field, no? So, but he pioneered the study of popular culture, comic art, and animation in Asia since 1964. In the Caribbean since 1968, and he has authored and edited, believe it or not, 82 books published and edited, and now he published and edits the International Journal of Comic Art, Asian Cinema, and Verita. So,
good morning. I can't dance the way that Ronnie does. I had a hip replacement last year, but I'm glad to be here because AMIC is my favorite conference. I've been to general meetings and conferences. I think the first one was 1973, and I'm glad to be in the Philippines. I started my Asian research in the Philippines in 1964 and 65. I agree with the slogan that you can have more fun in the Philippines. I had a hell of a lot of fun in the Philippines. I even wonder why I'm still alive today. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also happy to be here talking about the need for theory that's not Western-centric. A few of us in North America and Europe were writing about this in the early 70s. And when I taught at University of Science Malaysia, 72 to 74, I implored my students to try to move in other directions with theory and to go back and look at Asian religion and Asian folktales and other means of communications and develop their own theories. So I'm glad that people like Shelton and others are doing that. So, all right. What I've been asked to talk about is comic art. And comic art is having a resurgence in Asia also. So let me read from some notes here, because I don't have a PowerPoint. If you thought it was difficult because, well, if I had a PowerPoint, you would be here probably for an hour or two till I adjusted the equipment. So that I've been told that I'm technologically challenged, which I thought was a compliment until someone told me it wasn't. So I'm a centennial. Yeah. All right. To many mass communication researchers, to rethink about comic art as a communicator is not likely, because they never gave the medium a first thought. And this should not be the case, because there's been tremendous impacts of the comic arts and the animation industries upon Asia, socially, in education, politically, in all the various dimensions. Think in terms of manga, with millions of circulation, that have impacts all over the world, that have changed the artistic habits of many cartoonists everywhere in the world. nearly everywhere in the world. Or think in terms of some of the strong political cartoons that came out of Asia at various times. The works of Prayun in Thailand, or the works of Abu Abraham or R.K. Lakshman in India, and of course many here. Think in terms of the comics, exquisite comics that came out of the Philippines, done by people like Fred Acala or Francisco Cochi. So these are, examples of this. Think in terms of animation, the classical type of animation that came out of China from 1955 to 1988. That was incomparable. There was no country in the world that was producing anything better, maybe as well, but certainly not better, in use of indigenous materials, local stories, and many other aspects. And today, think in terms of animation in the sense that China leads the world in hours of production in animation. 23 or 24,000 minutes of animation, which is a very large amount produced. All right, a lot of this has come about because of technology. There's no doubt about that. But it's also come about by recognition of the social and economic benefits that some countries have recognized. Certainly there is ample reason to rethink comic art. For after a lull of a few decades, comics and animation have had a resurgence in a number of places in Asia. As with other mass media, some were tied to the onslaught of new technology, some were related to the socioeconomic elements that I mentioned. And I won't go into the cyberology because some of that you probably already know, but one of the things that we're seeing more of is that, for instance, in the comic strips, you don't see the stacking of square and rectangle types of panels so much now. It's more like a cinematic effect with pans, close-ups, jump cuts, slower pacing, different locating of establishing shots, and also different pathways throughout the drawings. These are all available now, mainly because of the technology. And of course now there's technology that allows almost anyone to be a cartoonist, which is good and also bad. It's good in that people now can create their own websites and their own blogs, and it's also very good because the cartoonists and animators are now interconnected. When I started doing research on comics in the 1980s, it was a very difficult way to do it because there virtually was not a network, and you had to find one or two cartoonists, and they then would take you to other cartoonists. That's not necessary so much now. All right. The countries that showed a great interest in increasing animation and comics in the last 20 years have been South Korea, China, and Taiwan. South Korea started in 1994, and in 1994, the South Korean government recognized that there was a large export market that could be tapped with Korean animation. And of course, the way they were doing that at the beginning was through being the offshore providers for United States and European animation. Perhaps you know that 90% of American animation is produced in Asia. Now it's moved to even the cheaper or less expensive labor markets in Asia. The Simpsons is produced not in the United States, but is produced by ACOM, which is a South Korean company. So this is how this export interest started. And then after that, they were talking in terms of creating their own content and trying to market it internationally. This has become difficult. There have been all kinds of methods or ways to try to do this by setting up studios and offices in the United States, by having festivals, inviting the people from Disney and Pixar and others there to these festivals, having more of a presence at international animation and comics festivals, all of these ways. But it hasn't been that successful. And probably the reason is that it's difficult to find a universal theme. At the same time that you're trying to satisfy an audience that is local. China has that problem particularly. All right, I want to talk about three stimulators of this resurgence of comic art. One of them is the manga, the Japanese manga. I'm not a fan of Japanese manga. I have liked some of it in the past, but it's not my favorite, so I may be coming at this with the bias. But the manga came into other parts of Asia in the 1960s. A lot of it came in through anime, through animation. And then eventually the comic books also came in. It came in by piracy. Much of it was pirated. To the extent that in Taiwan, one man claimed that he was the king of the pirates. He took great pride in that. And yes, all right, 5 minutes. Okay, and also there was a lot of protesting against the import of manga and anime through demonstrations. In Korea, they banned the Japanese manga along with other Japanese culture up until the late 1990s. But what was strange in South Korea was that even though they banned it, it was not allowed in the country, they had a censorship committee to censor it. So they were realistic, knowing that it was coming in anyway. So South Korea pumped a lot of money into animation and comics, both in 94 and 97. And for the first 15 years of this millennium, China did the same. So that at one point in China, there were over 100 huge comic cons, which is a comic convention every year. There's no country in the world comes near that. And all of them were attended by hundreds of thousands of people. So all of these have had, the impact has been strong. It's been strong on how artists create. In the Philippines, you have Pinoy manga. In other countries, you have artists who are changing their styles or have changed their styles to the manga style, which, as you know, has the big sparkling eyes and long legs, other things that are really not Japanese. The second point is the changing infrastructure. So the impact of manga and the changing infrastructure. You have a number of new companies that have started all over Asia now that have changed the infrastructure. It's no longer this mainstream type of comics that we had so many years in Asia. So a lot of small companies started by individuals, started by collectives of cartoonists, started by families. In the Philippines, the Yonsons, for instance, started a company years ago that was successful for a number of years. But we also see the rampant commercialization of the comics and animation. So that now the cartoonized junk, and that's what I call it. I saw a store in Hong Kong at the airport that was selling all of these dolls and figurines, etc. this so-called, what I call cartoonized junk, in some cases is taken away from the characters and the stories themselves. Sometimes some of the companies are thinking in terms of the merchandise before they get to the stories. So this is another big change, not necessarily for the better in my view. Also the fact that not so much in Asia but all over the world, the conglomerates are owning more and more of the comics and animation, which they've done now with all mass media and have done for a number of years. In Asia, in Japan, you have 4 large comic book companies that rank among the first 24 book publishing companies in the world. And there are others in Europe like that. All right, and also you've had these conglomerates in India, in Indonesia, Thailand, and other places. Okay, the last point that I want to make is the reinvention of comics. And comics have been reinvented a few times. The type of comic book that was left behind by the soldiers after World War II, those were changed in the first 20 or 30 years in some countries. They were not the 32-page black and white with color covers in all countries. There were different variations of them. Well, they've been reinvented again. And one of the aspects now is the graphic novel. You're seeing more and more countries where you have creators doing graphic novels, which are longer versions of comics, using narrative, etc. And also you're seeing the reinvention of genre. So you're not, the United States still is, glutted with superhero, but we're seeing other types also in Asia. The autobiographical stories, the stories of personal traumas, my cancer year, and things of this sort. So this is another change. So I just wanted to end with saying that there has been a resurgence of the comic art industries in Asia as well as other parts of the world, and it fits in with the resurgence of Asia itself. And I'll end at that point because I don't want to challenge Chris to pulling me off the stage. I think that would be a big task. I was about to. You were about to? Okay. Thank you very much.